Her fingers were already on the mango when she heard him. She'd been standing in the shadow of the street light for almost 10 minutes, arguing with herself about whether it counted as stealing if the branch was technically outside the fence. The neighborhood was the kind of quiet that costs money: no dogs barking, no cars, no porch lights flicking on out of curiosity. Just the low hum of climate-controlled houses and the smell of cut grass at 11 o'clock at night. Nicole had not eaten since the granola bar she'd found in her glove compartment the morning before. The mango tree leaned over the tall iron fence of the private estate on her right, heavy with fruit, a few of the lower mangoes hanging within arm's reach of anyone on the sidewalk. She'd driven past it twice in the past week, telling herself she was just scoping the street, that she wasn't the kind of person who needed to scope fruit trees, that she was fine. She was not fine. Her car, a 2019 Civic, with a front bumper her cousin had duct taped back on during a visit, that now felt like another lifetime, was parked 20 feet behind her, under a streetlight that flickered like it was tired of trying. Everything she owned was in that car. Her degree, sealed in its cardboard cylinder on the back seat, was the most expensive thing she'd ever owned, and the least useful thing she currently possessed. She reached up. Her fingers brushed the mango. She hesitated one more time. Not because she thought anyone was watching, but because she was still watching herself, the way she'd been watching herself for the past 3 months, cataloging every small surrender, every corner she'd cut, every "I'm fine" she'd said to people who were already walking away before she'd finished saying it. She pulled the mango down. The soft snap of the stem was barely a sound, but it landed in the silence like a verdict. "Those ones are sour." The voice was calm, male, close. Nicole did not scream. She was too tired to scream. What she did instead was go completely still, the mango gripped in both hands, her body doing the thing bodies do when they understand before the brain catches up that something has shifted irreversibly. She turned. A man stood just inside the iron gate of the property, tall, still, watching her the way someone watches a bird that's landed on their windowsill, not with alarm, not with possession, just with quiet attention. He wasn't angry. He wasn't reaching for a phone. He was simply there. "I'm sorry," Nicole said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that, at least. "I didn't realize. I thought it was, I'll just go." She was already backing up. He stepped closer to the fence, unhurried, and she forced herself to stop moving because running would have been worse. Running would have made it real in a way she couldn't take back. "The ripe ones are higher," he said. She blinked. He reached up without effort, fingers finding a branch in the dark, the way someone reaches for a familiar object in an unlit room, and twisted a mango, free from higher up in the canopy. He held it out through the bars of the gate. Nicole looked at the mango, then at him. She didn't take it. "Why aren't you angry?" He studied her for a moment. Not her face, her posture, the set of her shoulders, the way she was working very hard to stand straight. "Hungry people don't look like thieves," he said quietly. "They look like you." That hit somewhere she hadn't expected. Not soft clean, like something said not to wound, but because it was simply true, and he had decided she deserved the truth more than she needed the comfort of his pretending not to see. She didn't know what to say to that. She took the mango. Their fingers didn't touch. She made sure of that. Welcome to Afro-Korean Drama. Every story on this channel is original, written, and produced for this community, one scene at a time. This one is about what happens when someone sees exactly who you are at your lowest and chooses to treat you like a person anyway. About pride. About the quiet ways someone can save your life without ever making you feel like you needed saving. If you love emotional, cross-cultural drama that actually has something to say, you're in the right place. Hit subscribe and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I'd love to know who's up with me. Now, let's go back to that mango tree. The streetlight flickered once and steadied. Nicole stood in the thin light, holding a mango she hadn't asked for from a man she didn't know, and she felt for one unguarded second like crying. Not because she was sad, because she was seen and she hadn't been seen in a long time, and it turned out that was a different kind of hunger. She pulled herself back together the way she always did, quickly and without ceremony. "Thank you," she said. "I didn't mean to." "I know," he replied. Silence. The kind that doesn't ask you to fill it. She started toward her car. "You can use the gate next time," he said behind her. She stopped. "I won't be back." A small nod from him, like he'd expected that answer, like he respected it even though he didn't believe it. "Good night," he said. Nicole got into her car. She locked the doors, habit more than fear. She sat there, with both hands on the steering wheel and the mango in the passenger seat, and she looked back at the estate through the windshield. He was still standing at the gate, not leaning, not watching her in any way that should have felt threatening, just present, like a period at the end of a sentence. She drove 3 blocks, pulled over, and ate the mango in the dark. It was the best thing she'd tasted in 2 months. She didn't go back. She went back the next evening. She told herself it wasn't what it looked like. She'd parked on that street before she knew anyone lived there. And her route to the library, where she used her membership card to charge her phone and access job listings on the public computers, took her past it anyway. The fact that she slowed down near the estate was simply because the road was uneven. The fact that she sat in her car for 12 minutes with the engine off was because she needed to check her email. Taejin was outside already, standing near the gate with a glass of water in each hand, like he'd made a decision and simply waited for the world to confirm it. Nicole got out of the car. She walked over, because walking away felt more conspicuous. That was the story she told herself. He handed her one of the glasses without making a thing of it. She took it without making a thing of it. They stood on opposite sides of the iron bars and talked for a little while, the way strangers sometimes do in the evening when it's warm and there's no pressure in the air. He didn't ask her name. She didn't ask his. He didn't ask why she was parked on a residential street at night. She didn't ask why he was outside at this hour with 2 glasses of water. What they talked about, instead, was small and specific. Whether mangoes were better eaten with salt or lime, whether the tree was older than the house, whether the neighborhood had looked different 10 years ago. He said it had. More apartments, more people, a laundromat on the corner that was now a wine bar. "Climbing fences is dangerous," he said when she started back to her car. Nicole paused. "Use the gate," he added. She didn't say anything, but she glanced at the gate, a side entrance she hadn't noticed before, fitted with a simple handle, and the fact that she'd registered its exact location before she drove away was something she filed under things that didn't mean anything. The next morning, she Googled the address. She typed it into the search bar, the way you type a name into a search bar after a first date when you're telling yourself you're just being cautious, and then you're staring at the results and everything shifts by about 3 degrees. Kwon Urban Developments, founded 7 years ago. Real estate acquisition, community reinvestment, urban renovation. The CEO, Kwon Tae-jin. There was a photo corporate headshot, navy suit, the same measured expression he'd had through the gate bars, except, somehow, more formal. Like the face he showed the world had a different surface tension than the face he'd shown her. The company had been profiled twice in business magazines, reinventing urban real estate from the inside out. The Korean-American developer, changing how cities think about community housing. Nicole closed the tab. Then she closed her laptop. Then she sat in her car in the library parking lot and felt something hot and uncomfortable move through her chest that it took her a few minutes to identify as humiliation. Not because she'd stolen from him, she'd taken fruit from outside a fence, and she would stand on that distinction. But because she had stood in front of a CEO and let him see her at her worst, and she hadn't known, she'd thought he was just a man who happened to have a nice house and an unsettling quality of stillness. She hadn't known she was a charity case in front of someone who could afford to be charitable. He'd pitied her. That was the only explanation. The water, the better mango, the calm voice, none of it was kindness. It was the performance of someone who was comfortable enough in their wealth to be magnanimous about a woman eating their fruit in the dark. She stayed away from that street for 6 days. She found other parking spots, a church lot 3 blocks north that tolerated overnight cars, the far end of a strip mall where the security camera had been pointed at the sky for what appeared to be several years. She told herself the other spots were more practical, more central. On the 7th day, a man knocked on her car window at 10 in the morning. She was in the church lot. The engine was off. She'd been asleep, and she came out of it the way she always did, fast and silent, hand on the door handle before her eyes were fully open, sitting upright with her face composed before her brain had fully loaded. The man standing outside her window was Tae-jin. He wasn't wearing a suit. Dark jeans, a gray linen shirt, sleeves rolled up. He looked like someone who had run a plate number through a security log and then simply driven to where the car was, which was exactly what he had done. Nicole rolled the window down 2 inches. "How did you find me?" "Neighborhood security system covers 3 blocks. He said it without apology. "I wanted to make sure you were all right." "I'm fine." "I know," he said. He'd said that to her before, through the gate, and it had landed the same way, then not as agreement, but as acknowledgement. "I know you're going to say you're fine. I'm not asking you to say anything else. Why are you here?" He was quiet for a moment, not searching for words. He seemed like someone who always had them, and the pauses were choices, not gaps. "I have a garden that's getting out of hand," he said. "An orchard, technically. The mango tree, some citrus, a fig, raised beds in the back that haven't been touched this season. I was going to hire through an agency, but the work isn't full-time, and agencies complicate short-term arrangements." He looked at her steadily. "It would be 2 or 3 weeks of daily work. The rate is fair. Better than fair." Nicole looked at him through the 2-inch gap in the window. "Are you offering me a job?" "Yes." Out of pity. Something shifted in his expression. Not offense, exactly, but a careful, deliberate correction. "Out of need," he said. "The garden needs work. That's true regardless of you. I'm offering you the work because you're here, and you're capable." And he stopped. Started again. "Not help. Work. There's a difference." Those 3 words landed somewhere precise. Not help. Work. She wanted to say no. She'd rehearsed saying no in her head for 6 days without knowing she was rehearsing it. But her impound notice had arrived in her email at 9 that morning, $240, or they towed her car by the end of the week, and the church lot notice pinned under her wiper blade that morning had been politely worded but unambiguous. She rolled the window down the rest of the way. "When do I start?" He told her, "Tomorrow, 8 o'clock. Come to the side gate." She came at 7:45. The garden was, in fact, a mess. Not an abandoned mess, more like a place that had once been tended very carefully and had recently been left to do what living things do when no one is watching, which is grow in every direction at once, without regard for anyone's original intentions. The raised beds were dense, with volunteer plants and old growth tangled around new. The citrus trees needed pruning. The fig had gotten ambitious. The mango tree was magnificent and wild. Nicole had grown up helping her grandmother with a kitchen garden in Memphis, not an orchard, but enough. She knew what needed cutting back and what needed room. She knew how to read the soil by color and how to tell a root system that was struggling from one that was simply quiet. Tae-jin worked alongside her. She hadn't expected that. She'd expected him to show her around and then go inside and be a CEO somewhere. But instead, he pulled on work gloves and got into the raised beds, and they worked through the morning in the kind of silence that felt less like absence and more like a texture. He brought out sliced mango at 11 o'clock on a wooden board, served with lime and a pinch of salt, and set it on the low wall between the garden and the patio. He didn't make any comment about the fact that this was the same fruit that had started everything. Neither did she. They stood at the wall and ate, and the salt-lime-mango combination was precise enough to make Nicole close her eyes for 1 second, which she hoped he didn't notice. He was looking at the fig tree when she opened them, or he appeared to be. You know plants, he said. My grandmother did. I picked it up. Where is she now? She passed 3 years ago. She said it the way she said most things about her life, cleanly, with no purchase for anyone to catch hold of. Memphis. He nodded. No, sorry for your loss, which she appreciated. Just the nod. Acknowledgement, without performance. The fig was here when I bought the property, he said. I've been trying to figure out what to do with it. Leave it, she said. It knows what it's doing. He looked at her then, briefly, the corner of his mouth, doing something that wasn't quite a smile but was in the same neighborhood. She went back to the beds. The days settled into a rhythm. Morning work in the garden, slow and physical, and satisfying in a way that office work had never been. Lunch that Taejin prepared without ceremony, usually rice, sometimes noodles, once a Korean soup that smelled like her grandmother's house did when she cooked turnip greens. Something Nicole couldn't entirely explain, and didn't try to. Afternoon work that moved quieter than the morning, both of them finding a pace together that wasn't discussed, but simply established itself. They talked. Not constantly. Taejin didn't seem to feel the need to fill silence the way most people did, and Nicole had gotten out of the habit of speaking without purpose, but they talked. She learned that he had come to the U.S. for university at 22, that he spoke 3 languages, that he had 2 younger sisters still in Seoul, one an architect and one finishing a PhD in environmental science, that he kept the house sparsely furnished not because he hadn't gotten around to it, but because he genuinely preferred it. A couch, a dining table, a kitchen that was taken seriously, bookshelves everywhere. He learned that she had majored in urban planning, which surprised him, and then, visibly, did not surprise him at all. That she'd had a job she'd loved at a city development consultancy for 2 years before the contracts had dried up and the junior staff had gone first. That she could identify 14 varieties of mango by sight. What he didn't learn, because she didn't tell him, was where she slept. He didn't ask. But sometimes she caught him looking at her car when she arrived, the way you look at something you're tracking without being obvious about it. The slight delay between the first night she'd arrived with a fresh shirt and the morning she showed up in the same one she'd worn the day before. He didn't say anything. But the way he phrased certain things shifted. Come back tomorrow if you want, instead of see you tomorrow. No pressure in it, just the door held open. She found herself looking forward to the gate. That was the thing she noticed first, that the gate no longer felt like something she had to negotiate with herself to walk through. It had started to feel like a return. On the 4th day, he showed her the back of the property, a section she hadn't seen yet further from the road, where the orchard became a grove and the grove ended at a low stone wall. There was a wooden bench there, old and a little weathered, positioned to look at nothing in particular except the trees. I built that, he said. For summer, I had the place. Nicole looked at it. Why? Here. You can't see anything from here. That's why. He was quiet for a moment. When I bought this property, I didn't change anything in this section for almost a year. I just sat here. She waited. The first time I came to this neighborhood, he said, I was 23. I'd been in the country for about 8 months. Money from my family was supposed to arrive, and it didn't wire issue. A week's delay, then another week. The dormitory cafeteria required a meal plan swipe, and mine had expired. He said it without drama, as though he were describing traffic. I found out if you walked north about a mile from campus, there were streets with fruit trees, mangoes, figs. Some of them overhung the fences. Nicole was very still. This tree, he said. She looked at him. This specific tree, he said. I ate from it 4 times in about 2 weeks. He looked up at the mango canopy, heavy and green above the fence line. When I had enough capital for a first property purchase, I looked up the address. He paused. My board thought it was an investment property. It isn't. Nicole understood then that everything she'd thought she knew about why he'd been calm that first night, the CEO's magnanimity, the comfortable man's easy generosity, had been wrong. He hadn't been gracious from above. He'd recognized her from the same place. She didn't say anything for a long time. Neither did he. The ripe ones are higher, she said eventually, quietly. I know where they are, he said. I've known since I was 23. That evening she returned to the wooden bench after he'd gone inside. She sat there for almost an hour as the light changed, watching the grove go amber and then shadow. The next morning she came back and worked through to the afternoon without saying much, which was normal. But something had loosened in her that she hadn't known was tight. Near the end of the afternoon, she said, not looking at him, her hands in a raised bed, I've been sleeping in my car. He didn't react. Or rather, he reacted in exactly the way she'd feared he wouldn't, which was with simple acknowledgement and no rescue. How long? 10 weeks. He turned over a piece of soil with his trowel, let it breathe. Library parking garage? Rotating, wherever they don't notice long enough. Silence. I slept in my university library twice, he said. International students weren't supposed to be there after hours. There was a corner in the periodical section where the shelving created a kind of alcove. He looked at his hands. I ate an apple I'd been keeping in my backpack for 4 days because I was afraid to finish it. She exhaled slowly. I've never told anyone that, he said. She understood why. I went to that apple like it was a math problem. She said, if I eat a quarter of it now, and a quarter tonight, and if I find something else tomorrow, then, she stopped, the math of almost nothing. Yes, he said, exactly that. They were quiet for a while, the garden working around them, and something in the air between them felt different, not romantic, or not only romantic, equal. Two people who had done the math of almost nothing and survived it, and didn't have to explain it to each other. The following afternoon, everything fell apart. Nicole had finished early and was waiting near the side gate for Tae-jin to come back from a call he'd taken inside. She could hear his voice through the open kitchen window. Not the words, just the tone, professional and clipped, a different register than the one she'd come to know over the past week and a half. Then a window somewhere shifted and his voice became clearer, and she heard enough. Development rights, current residents, projected displacement by end of quarter, city council approval, pending. The whole neighborhood, not just the estate but the blocks around it, the apartments and older rental houses on the parallel streets had been quietly acquired, and Kwan Urban Developments was behind it. She heard the names of streets she recognized. She heard a phrase she'd heard in her 2 years of consulting work, density reallocation, which meant they were going to knock things down and build something more profitable in its place. She stood at the gate very still. By the time Tae-jin came back outside, she had taken off her work gloves and set them on the stone wall with the kind of care you give to an action when you're trying very hard not to do anything irreversible. He looked at her face and understood immediately that something had changed. You're building on this neighborhood, she said. He was quiet. Those streets to the east, the rental units on Calloway and on Fern, the families that have been there since before, these houses were expensive. She could hear herself and hated that her voice was steady, because the thing behind the steadiness was something she couldn't afford to show him. You're one of the people who make people like me. Nicole, I heard enough. She picked up her bag. I don't need the rest of the week's pay. What I've worked, we're square. She walked through the gate. Nicole. She kept walking. She drove 2 miles before she stopped, pulled over, and sat with her hands in her lap and the engine ticking down around her. She felt like someone who had just found out the ground she'd been standing on was never solid, had never been solid. And the fact that it had felt solid was just proof that she was the kind of person who mistook the surface of things for their truth. She thought about the bench, the apple story, the way he'd said, not help, work, like the distinction was a moral one. She'd believed him. She'd let herself believe him. And all along he'd been mapping out a redevelopment that would push out every person who couldn't afford not to be pushed out. She didn't sleep much. He found her the next morning. He was at the library parking garage at 7:15, which meant he'd done more than run a plate. He'd been paying attention to where she actually was, and he knocked on her window with the same steady knuckles she'd heard the first time. She didn't roll the window down. He stood there for a moment. Then he said, through the glass, "Can I have 10 minutes?" She looked at him. She looked at the clock on her dashboard. She looked at the middle distance for a while, deciding. Then she got out of the car. They stood on the concrete deck of the parking structure. The city spread out below them in the flat morning light, and Tae-jin told her the rest. When he'd started acquiring properties in this city 4 years ago, he said, the Callaway Corridor had already been identified by 3 major development groups as a target for high-density replacement. Not renovation, replacement. The plan existed before he'd bought anything. He'd found it in public records, which developers file when they begin the process, which most residents never read because most residents don't know to look. He bought the development rights to the neighborhood to stop them from being bought by someone else. He said this plainly. I bought the rights, he said, so that I could control what happens to the rights, not so that I could execute the original plan, so that I could prevent it. Nicole folded her arms. His plan, he continued, was to gut it, replace every rental building with luxury units. The rent-controlled buildings would have gone first. He had the city council votes. He paused. My plan is to renovate, keep every unit that currently exists. Lock rent at current rates with a 15-year cap. Why? She said. Because I know what it costs to have nowhere to go. He said it simply. I know what it feels like to be in a city that has no room for you at any price you can pay. I've spent 7 years building housing that doesn't do that. This neighborhood is not a product to me. It's an obligation. Then why didn't you tell your board that? Why the secrecy? Why does it sound like a standard acquisition on the phone? Because if my real motivation becomes public, the other developers will challenge the acquisition in court and delay the renovation until the current residents have already been displaced through the legal process. His jaw tightened slightly. I've seen it happen. You fight it publicly, and you lose what you were trying to protect while the fight is happening. He exhaled. I hate the game. But I'm playing it because the people on Callaway Street cannot afford for me to play it badly. Nicole looked at him for a long time. He looked back. I should have told you, he said. Not the strategy that I couldn't, but that this matters to me the way it matters to me. I let you think I was just a CEO with a garden. She didn't say anything. She was doing what she always did. When someone said something that required a full accounting of who she was going through every piece of what she knew about him, checking it against this new information, refusing to land anywhere until she was sure. What she came back to was the bench, the apple, the way he'd said, I've never told anyone that. If he was a liar, he was a very specific and costly kind of liar, one who gave away truths that made him vulnerable in order to build a false foundation, and that didn't fit. That didn't fit any version of him she'd seen. You know what the worst thing is, she said finally. He waited. I believe you. She said it like it cost her something. I don't want to. I'm much better at people being exactly as disappointing as I expect them to be. She looked away. You're making it very inconvenient. Something moved in his face. Something quiet and careful that he brought back under control almost immediately. I'm sorry, he said, for the inconvenience. She almost laughed. It surprised her, and she pressed her lips together. I'm going to go to my interview, she said. I have an interview today. She said it firmly, like telling him something that had been decided. He nodded. She went to her car, got in, sat there. She'd said interview, and it was true she did have one, at a city planning firm on the north side, at 2 o'clock today. She'd gotten the call 4 days ago, out of nowhere, from a recruiter she'd never contacted. She'd been baffled by it, but desperate enough not to question the luck. She pulled out her phone. The recruiter's firm. She searched it, cross-referenced it with what she knew about Tae-jin's professional network, the articles, the profiles, the advisory board of his housing nonprofit. The recruiter's name appeared in a community development event photograph from 2 years ago, standing next to Kwon Tae-jin. Nicole sat in the car for a long moment. She thought about the impound notice she'd been terrified of. She checked her email 2 days after it arrived and found that the fees had been paid. She'd assumed a clerical error at the city level and hadn't looked too hard at the explanation because she'd been too relieved. She thought about the motel coupon that had appeared in her email 3 weeks ago from a rewards program she barely remembered joining for a week's stay at a clean place 6 blocks from the library. She'd used it. She'd slept in a bed for a week, and she told herself it was just a promotion. She went back. Tae-jin was in the garden, pulling something that had grown where it shouldn't. He looked up when she came through the gate. "The recruiter," she said. He was still. The impound fees. Still. "The motel." She stood in front of him. "That was all you." He didn't deny it. "Why didn't you just tell me?" She said it more quietly than she'd intended, which was worse somehow. Why do it like that? He set down his trowel. He looked at her the way he'd looked at her that first night through the fence, not at her face, at her posture, at what she was holding together. "Because if I'd offered," he said, "you would have refused." She opened her mouth. "You know you would have," he said, not unkindly. She closed it. "If life offered it," he said, "you would accept. So I made it look like life." Something broke open in Nicole's chest. Not dramatically, not the way things break in stories where people collapse or shout or grab someone by the arm. Just quietly, the way a held breath releases the slow surrender of something that had been clenched for a very long time. She'd been holding on for 10 weeks. The pride and the math and the careful management of how she looked standing in the light. She'd been gripping the wheel so hard her hands had stopped feeling it. She cried. Not loud, just the way you cry when you're exhausted and you've stopped pretending and someone has seen you so clearly for so long that there's nothing left to defend. Tae-jin didn't move toward her. He didn't touch her. He stood nearby and let her be in it, the way he sat with silence, not filling it, just holding the space so it didn't feel empty. When she was done, she pressed her palms against her eyes for a moment. "You made it look like life," she said, to the ground. "You deserve to have something go right," he said, "without it costing you." She looked up. He was watching her with the same steady, careful attention he'd had through the gate bars on the first night. That expression that had unsettled her then because she hadn't known what it meant, she knew now. It meant, "I see you, and I have been treating you accordingly from the beginning." She had 30 minutes before she needed to leave for the interview. She sat on the stone wall and he brought water, and they were quiet for a while, the garden doing its work around them, the mango tree pulling the light. "If I get this job," she said. "You will." "If I get this job," she repeated, firmly, because she wasn't in the habit of taking anyone's certainty on credit. "I'll need somewhere to stay while I find a place." The motel's booked-out end of the week. He looked at the house, then at her. "I have a guest room," he said. "Actual room, door that closes." She looked at the house, too, at the gate, at all the distance she'd traveled since the first night she'd stood outside that fence in the dark, arguing with herself about a mango. "That would need to be work," she said. "Some kind of arrangement. Not..." "Obviously," he said. He was almost smiling. "Not quite. Orchard management. Consultant rate." "That's not a real rate." "I'll make it one." She looked at him for a long moment. "I'll think about it," she said, which was as close as Nicole got to yes before yes was fully confirmed. She left for the interview. The interview lasted 45 minutes and ran long because she knew exactly what she was talking about. And the senior planner across the table had that particular expression Nicole had learned to recognize, the one that meant they'd come in, expecting to fulfill a courtesy, and were leaving with something they hadn't planned. On finding. She drove back to the estate in the late afternoon. She had the garden key in her bag. She'd planned to return it. It was the proper, clean thing to do. Close the loop, walk away, move into whatever came next, with her hands empty. Tae-jin was outside when she came up the walk. He'd been watering the citrus near the side wall. He turned the hose off when he saw her face. "How was it?" "They want me back Thursday for a second meeting." She said it carefully, like a fact she was still adjusting to. The senior planner said they've been looking for someone with a development background who also understood community impact. She said, "I framed things differently than their last 3 candidates." He nodded, not surprised. She reached into her bag, took out the key, held it. He looked at it. "You can keep the mangoes," he said. "I'd rather you stay." Nicole looked at the key in her hand. She looked at him. She looked at the gate, the side gate, the one with the simple handle, the one she'd first noticed through the bars on her second evening on this street when she'd told herself she wouldn't come back. She put the key back in her bag. She walked through the gate without hesitation. Not like someone accepting a favor, like someone coming home. This story was always about one thing underneath everything else: the difference between help and dignity, between seeing someone and fixing someone. Tae-jin didn't rescue Nicole. He made space for her to rescue herself, and he did it without ever making her feel like she was being rescued. "I want to ask you something. When he arranged the job, the motel, the interview, without telling her, was that love? Or was that control? Even well-meaning control? Or does intent change everything?" And Nicole was walking through that gate at the end, a choice she made, or one she was led to? I don't have a clean answer. That's why I wrote it. If this kind of story, slow, specific, emotionally honest, is what you come here for, subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you thought of Tae-jin's "I Made It Look Like Life." Tell me if you would have walked through the gate.